All right, guys. Hello. Hey, guys. There we go. So we're about to get started. Thank you all for coming out. We're going to start with Max. He's going to talk about various large-scale architectures that exist out in the wild. So, yeah, I'll pass it off to Max.
Awesome. I don't have slides, mostly because I think that for this it will actually be a lot easier to just use the whiteboard.
I can't hear you.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Good.
Cool. Okay. So I'm not going to be using slides. It'll actually be a lot easier to just use the whiteboard. And yeah, so I want to talk about kind of some applications, or in particular one application that I think a lot of people use on a pretty regular basis, and kind of what it actually looks like technically. And just kind of like run over the high level, but still like get some interesting stuff out of it. So how many people use Spotify? Okay, it's a pretty good number of people. So Spotify is, for those of you who don't use it or don't know about it, if those exist, it's a music playing application where you stream everything from the internet or from a centralized server. But it's really interesting and differs from a lot of other services, and that rather than simply streaming from one server or streaming from one site that has multiple servers on the back end, it also uses peer-to-peer sharing to help reduce the load on Spotify's like actual servers, and also decrease latency so that you can start songs really, really quickly. And they've managed to get that down to you can start just about any track in about 200 milliseconds, no problem. And so the way they do this is, so you have your client, and you have Spotify. And so this is always a given. You're always going to be talking to Spotify, and Spotify is always going to be talking to you. However, you also have other people who are also using it. So you have friends and family and professors, teachers. And at the same time, you're also talking to all of these people. So let's say that you really like listening to the Black Keys. And let's say that some of your friends also really like listening to the Black Keys. So when you go to one of their albums and you select a track, Spotify will do a couple things. First, it'll actually go to Spotify and say, hey, who else that I could connect to is listening to the Black Keys? And Spotify, in this case, will say, hey, your friends are listening to the Black Keys. So rather than actually going to Spotify and getting all this audio data, you'll actually go to your friends and you'll start pulling down like the initial maybe 5 or 10 seconds of the track. And this can happen really quickly, and you can already have a connection established to them. So from kind of an architecture point of view, it's good. You have a community of these individual computers that are all working together to kind of reduce the load on Spotify's end. However, sometimes your friends don't listen to the Black Keys. Maybe you really like some obscure indie artist. Then in that case, you'll go to Spotify and you'll say, hey, I want to listen to this artist. And Spotify will say, nobody else listens to this. You're a hipster. So here are here's the initial data, and now I'm going to record the fact that you actually have this song. So now, if any of your other hipster friends want to listen to this music, then they can go talk to you. And so, yeah, I mean, that's the big gist of it. There's also some more technical stuff kind of in some statistics that they found in looking at all of this stuff. I don't know, people interested in that? Go on for a little bit more. Or answer questions, that works too.
So is it that when once you listen to a song on Spotify, is it that you keep that file around and you're able to provide it to others as long as you're online?
Yeah, so actually you end up keeping a cache of all the recent tracks that you've listened to. And you can actually configure this in the Spotify application. But I think by default they do maybe about 5 gigabytes of cache. Somewhere between 1 gigabyte and 10 gigabytes, probably 5. And it just uses a least recently used caching scheme. So if your cache is full and you listen to something that wasn't in there, it bumps up the least recently used track. So yeah, it does that. It keeps those around so that when you connect to people, you can, or when other users want to listen to things, they can connect to you. And the server actually ends up tracking state. Well, so there's actually 2 ways it happens. One is the server ends up tracking state, so you can ask the server who are the other peers I could connect to get this data from. And at the same time, you can also send out a message to all the peers that you're currently connected to. So if you just downloaded a track from your family or a family member, then you can say to that family member, hey, I'm looking for this track. Do you have it? And if not, do any of the people that you're connected to have it? And that'll go 2 levels deep, because if you went any further, it would just get kind of absurd. So, yeah.
Okay, a few questions. Does this happen while songs are queued, or does it only happen like right when a song is started?
It happens all the time.
Okay.
So here's a fun statistic. 61% of the time, your listening habits are predictable, which means that you're either going to listen to the next song in the queue or a previous song in the queue. And in that case, Spotify can actually go and start fetching small amounts of the data for those tracks. But the other 39% of the time, you're going to randomly access. And so at that point in time, when you actually click on the random song, that's when it would have to go out and actually grab the data. So it kind of depends on how you're using it.
So how does this affect your personal bandwidth usage if you're both getting stuff from Spotify but also giving to people around you?
Wonderful question. Spotify is on top of that. Actually, one of their priorities is to make sure that you're not congesting your network devices. And so at any given time, you are only aware of, let's see, there's a hard limit on 60 peers that you're aware of, but it's only really ever fetching data from a small number of them. And then you're only ever uploading data to 4 external peers. So there is a lot of limiting in that sense. Also, if your network utilization is really high, then it will actually start kind of limiting that automatically. So it takes care of that. Yeah.
What about mobile users?
So the paper that I read on this was published before they actually came to the United States, and probably also a little before they were really heavy into mobile. So it didn't talk a lot about that. They use TCP as the transport protocol. So in that case, I'd assume, well, let's see. I don't know how relevant the TCP thing was. I'd assume that there's still a cache on the mobile device, but the mobile devices themselves are probably not nodes that you can get audio data from. I'd guess that probably in the mobile case, you actually go directly to Spotify's server. That'd be my guess, but I don't know.
Do songs start at a lower bit rate and then increase as more data is available, or does it start off high?
Nope. So Spotify has 2 tiers. There's the 128 bit rate, and then there's the 320 bit rate. And there's no like get the lower one and then start higher. Actually, if you have like the 128 bit rate version, and someone's looking for the 320 bit rate version, then they actually can't use your copy. It'll go use the proper bit rate from the get-go.
Are there any concerns that Spotify has to take into consideration when dealing about people just taking their cash and running away with it, like as far as copyright infringement?
So they use their own protocol for all the transfer, and all the data is encrypted. I mean, you could feasibly reverse engineer their encryption if you wanted to. So it's an issue, but I don't think it's a huge issue for them.
So how to compare this with BitTorrent?
It's very similar to BitTorrent, actually, and they actually reference some of the peer-to-peer aspects of BitTorrent in the paper that they published. So I think this will be the last one.
Yeah, quickly, I think you might have said this, but how much of, like, when I'm using Spotify, how much of it is through peer-to-peer? Like, how much am I, like, what percent?
As much as possible, actually. You can't really say. To be honest, I skimmed over their performance analysis a little bit. Mostly wanted to get to the details of how it worked. So they may have a characteristic, or they may have characterized that, but they try and use the peer-to-peer as much as possible, just because it reduces the load on Spotify's end.
Right. I'm just curious.
Yeah. So.
If you don't.
Yeah. The interesting number that they have though was about 250 milliseconds between the time that you request to play a song and you start playing a song for pretty much anything. Is their average. And actually, if you have two computers with the same Spotify account open, and you press play on one of them and the other one's playing, you'll actually see that 250 milliseconds. It will almost instantaneously pause the other computer and start playing on one of them. It's pretty cool. So, right. Last question in the back.
Yeah, is there any kind of authentication for making sure that the song that I'm downloading from my friend is actually the right song?
They didn't really talk about security in their protocol. I know that, well, I would assume that that's something they've covered in the library that they use. If you ever do any Spotify development, they actually have a C library that you can use to develop applications, but it's not open sourced. You just get the compiled binary. So I'd assume that they're doing the checking.
It sounds like it'd be hard to do that because you can't just check some whole file and have like Spotify sign that, because to verify that you have to download the whole file. So you'd have to have some sort of screening signed checksum, which, yeah.
Yep. No, I don't know. They didn't talk about it, so that actually would be interesting to look into that. For sure. Cool.
Also, can you put up some more information like the paper that you read
Yes.
up somewhere where people can access it?
I will post that into the Michigan Hackers group, so people will be able to see that.
Awesome. All right. So next, we're going